Hello, 1, 2. OK, the mic is working. So hi, I'm Nikos. I'm a cryptography researcher at Fireblocks. This is Oren. He's a security researcher at Fireblocks. And we will be talking about how to hack cryptocurrency wallets. So what's a cryptocurrency wallet? Well, in order to spend, let's say, Bitcoin, you need a wallet. That wallet holds a key. That key allows you to sign transactions. These transactions, the signatures, you can broadcast to the blockchain in order to send cryptocurrency to your favorite people. So what's the problem with this setup? Well, there is a single point of failure because the key is sitting in your mobile, let's say, and it is waiting to be stolen. How can you minimize this risk? Well, you can use multi-party computation, also known as MPC. So what's MPC? So at a very high level, the idea is that instead of having the key in one place, the key is split into shares, and these shares reside with distinct parties. Actually, MPC promises much more than this because the key is never assembled in one place. In order to calculate their key shares, the parties run an interactive protocol, and then every time they want to sign a transaction, they run a different interactive protocol to calculate the resulting signature. So small aside, MPC is much bigger than what I just described, which is the use case of threshold signatures. It is the crown jewel of modern cryptography. Basically, anything you can do with a trusted centralized party, you can do trustlessly with MPC. There are countless examples. I'm not going to go over them, but what I will say is that commercial adoption has been a bit slow. So MPC has been around since the 80s. The most significant commercial application was the Danish sugar beet auction of 2008. And with the advent of blockchain technologies, MPC has found its first killer applications, and it is protecting billions of dollars in digital assets.
Well, we're here to talk about attacking MPC wallets. Well, what could be an outcome of such an attack? Well, one thing could be a denial of service. If I somehow manage to freeze your wallet, not so you can't spend your crypto, that's a problem. A more severe thing would be signature forgery. Let's say Nikos and I, we have an MPC wallet together, and I tell him, hey, let's sign this $10 transaction. And because I'm leveraging some flaw in the MPC protocol, I actually made him inadvertently, without him knowing, sign a totally different transaction. So that's a problem. But the much bigger potential outcome of an attack could be is complete private key exfiltration, whereas I tell him, hey, let's sign this transaction. He signs, but actually he leaked his entire private key share to me, and now I can sign whatever I want, whenever I want, no longer requiring his consent. Today's attack will be focused solely on this, the most critical potential outcome of an attack on an MPC wallet. We will show you 3 different attacks. Each one of them will result in private key exfiltration. So while we will be talking about attacking MPC wallets, I would like you to have this threat model in mind. So here you can see a few different MPC parties that have an MPC wallet together. And one of them, namely Alice, will be acting maliciously. Now, either she woke up one day, she decided to be evil, or maybe she was compromised by an attacker, and now they're using her identity. Whatever the case of her motivation, her goal waking up in the morning would be to exfiltrate all the other counterparties' key shares. And she will do that by just signing normal-looking transactions with them using the MPC protocol. So the research findings that brought us here today has affected many parties. It affected some of the biggest crypto wallets. It has affected a number of crypto custodians. It affected the most popular consumer MPC wallet, and also some of the most popular open source MPC libraries. Namely, we discovered 4 novel attacks, including 3 0 days. It affected 16 vendors and libraries. We will be releasing at the end of this talk 4 fully working proof of concept exploit codes. We actually use these proof of concept exploits against 2 vendor production environments and leaked our own private keys. The last thing I want to stress is most of our attacks are not implementation specific. We will be attacking MPC protocols at the protocol level. So the 3 attacks we'll be covering today, we'll start with the most popular 2-party signing protocol. It's called Lindell 17. carrying out the attack will require somewhat high level of interactivity. Then we'll go on to the second attack, attacking the most popular multi-party signing protocol, the GG18, GG20 family of protocols. Last but not least, we'll touch on what we call the do-it-yourself protocol because it doesn't adhere very closely to any academic paper.
Great. So in order to understand our attacks, we're going to need a few items of background material. The first item in the background is the math. Thankfully, no advanced math. We're not going to be talking about elliptic curves or even abstract groups. The only thing you need to know for today is the modulo operator. What's the modulo operator? Well, very simply, x modulo n is the remainder of x divided by n. So 5 modulo 5 is 0 because 5 is divisible by itself. And 6 modulo 5 is equal to 1 because 6 is greater than 5, and there's an overflow. Good. The next item in the background is homomorphic encryption. What is that? Well, it's a special kind of encryption that allows computation on encrypted data without decrypting the ciphertext. So let's look at an example. Let's say that Alice sends an encryption of the number 42 to Bob. So here and throughout the talk, we will be using color coding for values that only one party knows or the other. So that will be red for values that only Alice knows, and blue for values that only Bob knows. Bob receives the encryption of 42, and he can operate on this encryption. He can, for example, multiply by the value 2 and then add the number 100. He does so obliviously without knowing what's happening inside the ciphertext. Alice, after receiving Bob's message, she can decrypt the value, obtain the result without ever knowing which two particular values Bob used. So Bob could have used 2 and 100, or he could have used 0 and 184. That's homomorphic encryption. There are many kinds of homomorphic encryption. We will not be diving into any of them. We will be only looking at the most vanilla kind, which is parameterized by a public key n. This is a number, which is the product of two big primes, and this detail will become relevant later in the talk. Great. So the last item in the background is the ECDSA signature scheme. This is the most popular signature scheme in the blockchain space. It is used by Bitcoin. It is used by Ethereum, among other blockchains. Great. So in order to sign in an ECDSA fashion, and also all the protocols we'll be looking at will be realizing this scheme. So in order to sign in an ECDSA fashion, you do something like this. So you sample a random value k. This value is called the ephemeral key. It is chosen afresh with every signature, and it is a secret value. Then, to calculate the signature, you simply compute a function of the message to be signed, so that's the transaction, the ephemeral key k, the private key x, as well as a value L, which is a constant, a public constant, associated with the ECDSA signature scheme. So that's what you would do if only one party was involved. But what about two parties? Well, the idea that we've already alluded to at the beginning of the talk is that instead of having the secret material in one place, we will split the secret material among the parties. OK, so with that in mind, let's look at our first exploit. So we will be showing how to compromise implementations of the Lindell 17 protocol. This is the most popular two-party signing protocol, and there were more than 5 affected vendors and open source projects. So the Lindell 17 protocol goes something like this. There's a key generation phase. The parties choose random shares of the private key, so that would be x1 for Alice and x2 for Bob. And then something interesting happens. Bob encrypts his key share under a homomorphic scheme that he controls, and he sends that value to Alice. The important thing to remember is that only Bob can decrypt this thing, but Alice can operate on it, and this will be relevant for the signing phase. So what does the signing phase look like? First, we need to address the elephant in the room. This is a cryptography talk. Formulas are going to appear. Everybody's an adult here. Nothing bad is going to happen. Good. So what does the signing process look like? So the idea of the signing process is that Alice will send an encrypted partial signature to Bob, and she will calculate this partial signature by homomorphically evaluating the encryption she obtained during key generation. Specifically, she would send this value. So the only reason I am displaying this value is to show you that almost all the ingredients of the ECDSA signature scheme are there. We have our X's, we have the message, and we also have Alice's K1. The only thing that's missing is Bob's K2. So how do you finalize this signature? Well, it's actually fairly simple. Bob simply decrypts what he obtained from Alice. He multiplies by his contribution to the private key share, and he reduces everything modulo the ECDSA constant. At this point, in order to check that it's a valid signature, he simply applies the algorithm for verification. Because what happens if Alice deviates from the protocol? What happens if, let's say, Alice falls asleep and she forgets to multiply by her K1? At this point, Bob will fail to verify the resulting signature, and he will notify Alice of this. Or maybe the signature doesn't make it to the blockchain. What happens then? Well, to answer this question, we will consult with the paper, and the paper has this very interesting instruction. It says that any abort, so any invalid signature, will imply no later execution, which means, in practical terms, that if Bob detects an invalid signature, then the wallet is locked.
Well, putting our adversarial hats on, after learning about this, we thought, well, how about we leverage this into a denial of service attack, and we manage to freeze somebody's wallet? So we found some open source implementations that implemented Lindell 17, and we set up to try it out. So we made Alice send some nonsense partial signature and tried it out. Surprisingly, nothing happened. No wallets were ever locked, so we could try again and again and again. So we're kind of bummed. Our attack didn't work. We went back to the drawing board and asked ourselves, why was that assumption there as part of the protocol if no implementation in the wild does it? So the paper is actually very, very clear about this. It says, the problem is that Alice may send an incorrect partial signature to Bob, in which case, the mere fact that Bob aborts or not can leak a single bit about Bob's key share. Now, doing 1 + 1, taking this intuition into some kind of hypothetical attack scenario, it might look something like this. So malicious Alice would craft a partial signature that fails to finalize depending on 1 bit of Bob's key share, and then she'll just wait to see if it finalized or not. Then she could do it again, targeting the 2nd bit, do it again and again, each time knowing whether the bit is 1 or 0, depending on whether the signature verified or not. Fast forward 256 signatures, voila. She has his entire key share, and she can sign whatever she wants, bypassing the promise of the MPC protocol. This is a bit simple if you just try to visualize it. To actually carry out this attack mathematically, you need a cryptographer like Nikos.
So that's where we stopped relying on the paper, and we had to think for ourselves. And what we did is we had a long, hard look at the partial signature that Alice sends. And we tried to mess around with it. We tried to mess around with the X. We tried to mess around with the message, with the K, trying to create a significant leakage. But nothing happened. But then the crypto gods smiled on us, and we had a breakthrough. Basically, we realized the following. By switching the modulus, so instead of using the ECDSA constant, we use the public key of the homomorphic encryption scheme. These two values are equal after Bob decrypts if and only if x2 modulo k1 is equal to 0. I will remind you that x2 is Bob's secret, and k1 is the value that Alice controls. So I will spare you the mathematical mumbo-jumbo, and I will give it to you in a picture. So the idea is that Alice can attack, so she can switch the modulus, and if the signature is valid, she learns that K1 divides X2. If the signature is invalid, she learns that K1 does not divide X2. So why is this interesting? It's interesting because this is an attack that already leaks the least significant bit. Why? Because Alice can simply choose K1 equals 2. And in this case, she obtains leakage X2 modulo 2 equals 0. And this corresponds exactly to Bob's least significant bit. Great. So that gives us 1 bit. What about the rest of them? Well, for the next bit, the natural strategy is to use the next power of 2, namely 4. In this case, Alice learns whether x2 is divisible by 4. So that's great if the first bit were 0. Because if the first bit was not 0, then this leakage is absolutely useless because the signature will always fail. And in reality, the desired leakage is whether x2 minus 1 modulo 4 is equal to 0. So how do we get this leakage? Well, to get this leakage, we simply need to massage the algebra. Namely, Alice needs to offset the partial signature that she sends to Bob by a value that depends on the bits that she already exfiltrated. So to summarize, in order to exfiltrate the ith bit, Alice sets k1 equals to 2 to the I. She offsets the partial signature by a value that depends on whatever she already knows about Bob's key. And in the end, depending on whether the signature validates or not, she obtains the ith bit as leakage.
So we actually wanted to see if this would work. So again, we found an open source implementation, the most popular one of the Lindell 17 protocol, published by Zengo, and we tried to see if it would work. Running the POC looks like this. So we're starting to sign, and each signature, as you can see on the right-hand side, leaks us a single bit about the other party's key share. We know if it's a 1 or 0, if it failed or not. So doing this 256 times, each time targeting a different bit and leaking it, we can now get Bob's entire key share, combine it with our own key share, and print the master private key in beautiful hexadecimal format and spend away. So we have disclosed this to the affected vendors, and they have a mitigated sense. How did they do that? Well, they simply followed the paper's recommendation. For example, once you detect a failure, don't sign again. There might be other ways to mitigate this. To explain one more way one could mitigate this attack, we'll need to introduce a new cryptographic primitive. It's called a zero-knowledge proof. What is it? Simply, it's a proof that yields the validity of a statement and nothing else. To illustrate with an example, Alice can encrypt a number, x, send it to Bob along with a zero-knowledge proof that proves the number is within some range, for example, 1 to 42. Now, Bob verifies this zero-knowledge proof, and if it verifies, he can be convinced that now what he holds is indeed an encryption of a number between 1 and 42, and he learns nothing else by it. So taking this intuition of this new cryptographic primitive, maybe we could add a zero-knowledge proof to the protocol to make sure that Alice does not deviate from the protocol when she computes the partial signature. Congratulations, we're done with the first attack of the day, and now we're on to the second attack of the day, compromising the most popular multi-party signing protocols, the GG18 and GG20 family of protocols. There have been more than 10 vendors and open source libraries affected by this. So when we explain the Lindell protocol, we actually explain how it works end to end. But the GG protocols are quite complicated. They actually take between 7 and 9 rounds to create each signature, and we don't have the time for it. So luckily for us, the entire attack actually only takes place during the very first round. The very first round implements what's called a multiplication to addition. So we'll dive into this round and explain first how it works. What is multiplication to addition? It's a way to transform two multiplicative shares, in this example k and x, into two additive shares, alpha and beta, where this equation holds. So how does the paper say to do this? Basically, it says that Alice would encrypt her multiplicative share, k, and send it to Bob along with the zero-knowledge proof. Now Bob can operate on this homomorphic ciphertext. He can multiply it by his x, by his multiplicative share, and to make sure that he's not leaking anything about his x, he adds a mask to it. Now, Alice decrypts this value, and that's her alpha, and Bob's beta is minus the mask that he chose. Now, as you can see, x times x is indeed equal to alpha plus beta. There's one very important thing about this. If k and x are 256 bits, as they are in ECDSA signatures, the mask needs to be bigger than 512 bits to actually mask the value. So to explain the intuition behind this, we'll show it visually using small numbers. So first of all, if we didn't use a mask at all, and Alice would get, after decrypting, she would get x times k. She knows k, right? She chose it. She could just divide it by k and get x in the clear. So this clearly doesn't work. That's why we have the mask. So now adding the mask completely masks Bob's x, and this works fine. But what if the mask is not sufficiently big? What if, let's say, k is even bigger than the mask? And I want you to remember that Alice has full control over k. She chooses it afresh during every signature generation. So in this example, we can see that adding the mask actually hides nothing. The most significant bits that Alice receives once she decrypts the ciphertext leak Bob's x entirely. Well, how about we do this? How about we start signing as Alice, acting maliciously? We choose a really big k, and in one go, exfiltrate all the other parties' secret shares. Well, remember that zero-knowledge proof that I mentioned that Alice is sending? It actually includes a zero-knowledge range proof for k, making sure that it's no bigger than 256 bits, which makes this attack impossible. Well, hold on tight. We're going to dive into how this zero-knowledge proof works to see if there's something that we can do about it. Okay? So how does the zero-knowledge proof even look like? It's a bunch of numbers. One of those numbers is z. It's a number that's relevant for the range proof aspect of the proof. And it's calculated as follows. It's equals to w, which is a small random number Alice chooses, plus k. K is the number that Alice is trying to prove is sufficiently small, times a hash that depends on w, everything modulo n. Now, when Bob receives this, he verifies all the other numbers that are not relevant for the attack, and also makes sure that z is small enough. And as you can see, if k is too big, then z is not going to be small, so it will fail the range proof. I want to emphasize that Alice has to adhere to this formula of calculating z, because if she doesn't, some of the other verification that Bob does would fail. So how can we cheat in this range proof while adhering to calculating this formula as follows? What we'll do, we'll actually focus only on this part of the equation. And what we'll try to do is we'll try to zero it out. All right? If we manage to zero it out, then z will only be equal to w. No matter how big k will be, it will pass the verification. So how will we do that? We will use something called the Chinese remainder theorem. And in this case, because n, as Nikos said earlier, is a product of two prime numbers, if this value we're trying to zero out modulo each one of those primes zeroes out, then it also means that the value zeroes out modulo n, which is what we're trying to achieve. So looking at it through these lens, we'll try to zero out the left-hand equations one by one. And if we manage to do that, then we will have achieved our goal of zeroing out the right-hand equation. So the first half is actually quite simple. We choose k, so we could choose k to be equal to q. Then, by definition, q mod q zeroes out, and we're done with the first half of it. Now, what about the second equation? How can we zero it out modulo p? Well, what if the hash that depends on w just happens to be a multiple of p? Then also p mod p zeroes out, right? Is this likely to just randomly happen? Not really, but because we choose w, how about we brute force w, such as the hash that depends on it happens to be a multiple of p? Is this even feasible? No, it's not feasible, because the paper says that n needs to be 2048 bits, which makes p and q each over 1,000 bits of size. So what are we going to do? What if, instead of choosing n, remember, Alice is choosing n during the key generation phase, which happens once per wallet. But what if, instead of choosing it to be comprised of two symmetrically sized prime numbers, she would choose it to be comprised of two very asymmetrically sized prime numbers, whereas one, p is only 16-bit size, which is brute forceable in an instant. And q is sufficiently large for makeup for the size that n needs to be. You might be thinking, wait, isn't there some zero-knowledge proof to make sure that n can't be chosen in this way?
It turns out that there is no zero-knowledge proof for checking that there are no small factors for n. And the only thing that the implementations we looked at checked is whether n is square free. I won't be diving into the technical definition of square freeness. So it looks like we're done. It looks like we can choose the n with the small factor, and then set k to be a big value, then cheat in the range proof, and then exfiltrate all of the x's of the honest parties. Not so fast. Why? Because remember the MTA formula? So this is the value that Alice decrypt during the MTA. So actually, there is a pesky modulo n operation happening there implicitly, and why it happens is not very important. The point is that it's unavoidable. And this will mess with our leakage. Why? Because k is almost as big as n. And let's see what happens when we reduce things modulo n. So here we have k and n. They are 16 bits apart. And when we consider the value of k times x plus the mask, we see the x in the clear in the most significant bits. However, as soon as we apply the modulo operation, the most significant bits of x, they disappear. They go bye-bye. They fall off a cliff. And we only get partial leakage on x. What is the explicit leakage that we get? We only get x mod p, where p is a small prime. And we don't get x in the full. So we would like to have a way to obtain x in the clear.
Worry not, Nikos. Once again, the Chinese remainder theorem comes to our rescue. Now, how does it help us this time? So to explain it, let's take a number, x equals 23, right? There's a myriad ways we can encode this number. Like we can all see on the screen the number encoded decimally, we can encode it hexadecimally, so on and so forth. Actually, we can also use CRT to encode numbers. How would that look like? We would divide the number with a few different small prime numbers and save the remainder of these divisions. Now, using just this information, we could feed it back into the CRT algorithm to reconstruct the original number. Now, this looks a bit like magic, but it has its limitations. Namely, this would only work to encode a number that's as big as the product of the primes we used. So if we used 3, 5, and 7, as in this example, we could only encode a number of size up to 105. But in our example, in our use case, we're trying to encode a number x, which is 256 bits of size. So to do that, we'll need 16 small prime numbers of 16 bits of size each. So if we can get these 16 leakages one by one, we could feed them into the CRT algorithm and reconstruct the key share in its entirety. Is there a problem for us to do that? Actually, there is. We only have one n. N is chosen during the key generation phase and not during the signature generation phase. So we only have one n and therefore one p per wallet. So we can only use this attack that we described to achieve the very first leakage, which is 16 bits of size. What can we do now? Well, what if during the key generation, where Alice chooses n, instead of choosing it to be this handsome-looking value, which is a product of 2 prime numbers, she would choose it to be this monstrosity, which is the product of 16 small prime numbers, times q, which is a big prime number, to make for the desired size of n. Some of you might be saying, well, maybe there's some like zero-knowledge proof in the protocol that says you can't choose n to be this monstrosity.
It turns out that there is no zero-knowledge proof for checking how many primes the n has. The only thing the parties check is whether n is square-free. And I'm still not telling you what square-freeness is. So it looks like we're at the finish line. We can extract all of these remainders, and then in the end, we can get the x in the clear. So how do we do that? Well, remember, when n was the normal-looking n, we said k equals q, and we got leakage x mod p. Now that we have the bizarro n, we said k equals n over pi, and we get leakage x mod pi. So this happens in 16 different signature sessions. How does it happen? In the first session, we choose k over p1. We get leakage x mod p1. In the second signature session, we get leakage x mod p2, and so on and so forth, until in the end, we get leakage x mod p16. We feed all of these remainders into the CRT algorithm, and we recover x in the clear.
But will this actually work? So we said again, we found an open source implementation of the GG20 protocol, and we tried to see if it would work. Or running the exploit looks like this. It starts by choosing 16 small prime numbers to make the bizarro n. Then we start signing. Each time we're choosing k to get a specific leakage of x over mod pi. And then we cheat in the range proof, and we get that leakage. So we need to do this 16 times, 16 signature ceremonies. We take all of the leakage that we get from all of them, we feed it into CRT, and then we can reconstruct Bob's key share in its entirety. Now we can combine it with our own, print it in an hexadecimal format, load it up to our MetaMask or whatnot, and sign away. So we've disclosed this to all the affected parties, and they have remedied this. How could one go about doing that? Well, one could add the zero-knowledge proof for proving the well-formedness of Alice's n to make sure that she can't choose this weird-looking n that is required to carry out the attack. All right, we are done with the second attack of the day, and we're at our third and last one.
Right, so for this last attack, we will be showing you how to compromise a do-it-yourself protocol that we found in the wild. We will be exfiltrating the key in one signature, actually in less than one signature, in the first round of the first signature. And the protocol goes something like this. So it is also MTA-based. However, in this protocol, there are no zero-knowledge proofs accompanying the ciphertext that the parties send. Furthermore, the mask that Bob chooses is chosen to be as big as n. It's a random number that's as big as n. And why is this detail important? It's important because our previous attack is no longer relevant. Why? Because no matter how big k is, the mask is always going to hide x. So what can we do about this? Well, we can do the following. Without the zero-knowledge proof, Alice can send something that's not even a ciphertext. For example, she can send the value 4. In doing so, by carefully choosing a malicious n that is not square-free, mind you, Bob will inadvertently send back his x in the clear. Actually, it's not really in the clear. You need to do some data processing, and there's a bunch of primes involved, and you need to do CRT, and then there's like brute forcing. But everything happens in seconds.
So you can think about this last attack as a compressed version of the second attack that we showed you. Basically, instead of doing 16 signature ceremonies to get this leakage, we do only one, and then we brute force the numbers offline and do CRT to reconstruct it. So this demo is going to be quick. Don't blink. We sign. We do the MTA. Now we're doing the brute forcing. We're feeding the results into CRT, and voila, we have the key share of the other party.
Great. So in conclusion, what did we see today? So we presented a few novel zero-day attacks, and we showed how to exfiltrate the key from a bunch of MPC systems. As of today, MPC is the gold standard for protecting digital assets. But it is not a commodity yet. It is a sophisticated technology that requires expertise in order to be on top of things and follow the latest research. We hope that our findings today contribute to the security of the field and the health of the ecosystem. So here you can find the exploits that the POCs that Oren presented, as well as the technical white paper explaining the attacks. We will be taking questions now or offline. Thank you very much. Right, and the microphones are in the aisles.
Test. Hey, I'm Arik with Unciphered. We do cryptocurrency wallet vulnerability development. We broke like the Trezor recently with the T and the one key, so I'm sure you saw that. How is your experience with responsible disclosure? Because we're having a huge problem at our company when we find vulnerabilities that are affecting wide swaths of people like you guys are. We're going through a disclosure right now for early library for web wallets. But like, were they easy coming from you guys? I'd love to chat with you after about that, because we have a lot of things that you might be able to help with. But were they receptive? Was it quick? Or were people like, get away? Because a lot of cryptocurrency projects are like, it's not a problem. They'll even dox themselves online saying it's not a problem, but they leak the vuln.
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot. We might have made some learning mistakes throughout disclosing this. But one thing we've learned is that like, it really matters how you do it. So just the most gracious way, the most friendly way. And usually, like when we present it that way, we have receptive responses.
Of course, not everybody's like that, and some people don't take it very easily. So it depends.
Yeah. Oh, well, I have war stories for you afterwards, but cool.
Yeah, maybe we
sounds
can
about
discuss it, yeah.
about accurate.
Right.
Thank you.
As you guys are doing your research, how do you think about Edwards curves based signatures, so EDDSA for like Solana keys and things like that? Is it obviously K is not relevant, so I didn't know if you had any commentary on Edwards signatures.
So what's the question? Whether it's like it's a better scheme compared to ECDSA or?
Yeah, I mean commentary on that and just other attack vectors, right? I think as you look at more modern crypto, right? Like a lot of people are heading that way, even Polkadot with SR25519. Like, how do you think about protecting that as, you know, ECDSA will be?
So in the context of MPC or as a signature?
Yeah, in the context of MPC.
So in the context of MPC, doing like MPC for EDDSA is simpler, and there are fewer like mistakes that you can make. So it's probably better for the it's better. I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's simpler and it yields fewer mistakes. Maybe that's an answer.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.